Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a profound, universally experienced, and honestly, deeply misunderstood psychological transition. If you're watching this, well, there's a good chance you're looking for some clarity on a very specific kind of internal quiet. So grab a coffee, take a deep breath, and let's unpack what is actually happening beneath the surface. At some point in your life, maybe it's right now, maybe it's in your past, or, maybe it's a future you can't quite see yet, everything just kind of stops working. And I really want to validate this right off the bat. It rarely happens like some dramatic explosion. It's not this one massive catastrophic event. Instead, it's gradual, it's quiet. And despite your best efforts to just power through it, the things that used to fill your cup simply stop giving you energy. That crystal clear direction you had, suddenly it's just a thick fog. And that version of yourself you spent literally years building just isn't accessible to you anymore. But hear me on this right from the start. This quiet withdrawal of energy is absolutely not a personal failure. Section 1, when everything stops working, the universal edge. You see this sudden loss of direction? It isn't some quirky modern anomaly caused by burnout or our hyper-connected world. Actually, it's remarkably universal. Look at this. St. John of the Cross, a 16th century mystic, he called it the dark night of the soul. Fast forward to Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist, and he terms it the necessary descent. Then you've got Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, framing it as the belly of the whale. We're talking about mystics, psychologists, and mythologists across completely different centuries and cultures, all pointing at the exact same thing. They saw it not as some tragic accident or a breakdown, but as a deeply purposeful stage of human growth. So if you're in it, you are participating in a very, very old human process. Section 2. Not depression, but descent. Finding clarity. Okay, let's dive into a really crucial distinction here, because we have to carefully draw the line between a clinical pathology and a crisis of meaning. The dark night is so often mislabeled as depression, and it's easy to see why, right? The symptoms look super similar, the flatness, that loss of drive, the total withdrawal of energy. But Carl Jung was incredibly adamant about separating the two. Listen to this. Clinical depression is a crisis of function. It's an actual disruption of the neurological and psychological systems that regulate mood, and it absolutely requires clinical intervention. The dark night, on the other hand, that's a crisis of meaning. You might still be functioning perfectly fine. You're going to work, paying bills, maintaining relationships, but underneath all that functioning, the animating energy is just gone. The meaning that made the whole daily grind worthwhile has completely withdrawn. And because these are fundamentally different experiences, they require completely different responses. So what is the right response? Well, it starts with understanding Jung's concept of the necessary descent. I really want you to visualize this spatially. Jung believed your energy isn't actually lost or destroyed, it's just relocated. It has moved downward and inward. Your psyche is literally pulling its energy away from the outside world, your career, your public persona, your social identity, and it's driving it down toward your shadow, toward your deeper self, toward the life you haven't lived yet. So this descent isn't an interruption of your growth at all. Actually, scratch that. It's more like the absolute precondition for it. The tools you need for the next chapter of your life, you can only find them down there. Section 3. Why the dark night arrives. The counterintuitive triggers. Now, we're going to flip a common assumption completely on its head. Most people think you only hit this kind of psychological rock bottom when you fail. But Jung identified 3 deeply counterintuitive conditions that trigger the dark night. The very first one, success. Literally getting exactly what you set out to achieve and then having this terrifying realization that it's just not enough. It forces you to ask, well, if this isn't enough, what on earth would be? It's that horrible, jarring moment when you finally climb to the top of the ladder only to realize it's been leaning against the completely wrong wall. Then, condition 2 is transition. This is that specific, muddy darkness of the midlife in between, where the old rules just don't apply anymore, but you haven't figured out the new ones yet. And finally, the shadows accumulation. Look, if you spend decades suppressing the parts of yourself that don't fit into your nice, polished public persona, eventually, the accumulated weight of that unlived life becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. To put this into perspective, let's look at this timeline. Jung basically maps out human development into 2 halves. From year 0 to roughly 35, you're in construction mode, right? You're building the structures of the first half of life: survival, ego, establishing a career, maybe starting a family. But then, somewhere between 35 and 50, bam, we hit the midlife passage, the dark night. The scaffolding of that first half is all built, but the blueprint for the second half, totally blank. This crisis is really just the difficult, unavoidable bridge connecting the 2 distinct halves of your life. It's the messy passage that gets you to age 50 and beyond. Section 4. Moving through, not around. the belly of the whale. So how do we actually navigate the absolute darkest part of this interior drop without completely sabotaging ourselves? Well, Jung has a piece of advice that is brutally simple and honestly incredibly difficult to hear. Just 3 words: do not escape. See, when the dark night hits, our ego's immediate panicked instinct is to bolt. We try to escape through frantic busyness, doom scrolling for hours on end, quitting a job out of nowhere, or, buying that cliche midlife crisis sports car. We desperately try to rearrange the external furniture of our lives to fix an internal gaping hole. But Jung pointed out that all these little escape hatches do is temporarily numb the pain. They interrupt the psychological work, and ultimately, they just prolong the darkness. The work the darkness came to do is left completely undone. So instead of running for the hills, Jung actually laid out some highly specific, actionable tools for dealing with this shadow material. Number 1, dream work. When you're in the dark night, your unconscious mind goes into overdrive. So keeping a journal and paying really patient attention to your dreams is like getting a direct line to what your psyche is desperately trying to process. Number 2, active imagination. This literally means sparking up a dialogue with the uncomfortable thoughts and images bubbling up. You actually ask them what they want. You don't just shove them back down. And number 3, which might be the hardest, reduced external demand. You absolutely have to create interior space. Saying no, reducing your commitments, slowing down the treadmill. That's not retreating or giving up. It's actively creating the necessary conditions for this internal process to finally complete itself. Now, if you actually commit to that deeply uncomfortable process, eventually, you hit a turning point. And no, it's not some dramatic Hollywood montage where the clouds part and angels sing. Jung noted that it's actually a super subtle shift in the vibe of your experience. The darkness just begins to feel different. It stops feeling like this terrifying, empty void of meaning, and slowly, incredibly slowly, transforms into a quiet, almost alive presence. Your unlived life finally gets enough of your attention that the dark night stops feeling like a crushing weight and starts feeling a lot more like a compass, pointing in any direction. Which leads us perfectly to Section 5, the hinge of your life, the second dawn. Here's the most important takeaway from all of this. The dark night of the soul is not a punishment. It is not a sign of weakness, and it certainly isn't the permanent collapse of who you are. It is simply the necessary descent before the ascent. It's the darkness before the second dawn. The people who actually move through this, the ones who don't run away, who stay and do the heavy lifting, they emerge with a version of themselves that is so much more complete, so much more honest, and far more genuinely inhabited than anything they experienced in the first half of their lives. It's literally the gateway to a life built for genuine living, rather than just merely surviving. This dark night, it isn't the end of your story at all. It's the hinge. So, I'll leave you with this. If this is indeed the hinge of your entire life, what does it truly mean to pay genuine, unfiltered attention to whatever comes next? Answering that requires a pretty radical shift in how we engage with the world and the people around us. And as it turns out, that is exactly what we'll be diving into in our next explainer, where we're going to unpack the incredible philosophy of Simone Weil and the profound, transformative cost of true attention. Until then, remember, if you're sitting in the dark right now, you are not lost. You're just descending. And the only way out is through.